The prohibition of pork in both Islam and Judaism represents one of history's most enduring dietary laws, spanning thousands of years and billions of followers worldwide, with many scholars suggesting these restrictions contain hidden meanings lost to modern society. Archaeological evidence from ancient Mesopotamia reveals that pork taboos existed long before the formal codification in religious texts, pointing to deeper ancient wisdom that might explain why two of the world's major religions independently developed such similar prohibitions. The fascinating connections between these religious traditions, their overlapping dietary codes, and their potential hidden meanings have been systematically overlooked by conventional historical analysis. If you find this exploration illuminating, take a moment to check out our other videos on religious mysteries and consider joining the Celestial Chronicles community to continue these discussions. What cosmic knowledge might be encoded in these ancient food restrictions? Could there be more to these prohibitions than meets the eye? Let's examine the evidence more closely. When we study ancient Semitic cultures, we find that pork avoidance wasn't universal in the region before these religious codifications. Many neighboring civilizations consume pork regularly, including Egypt during certain periods in various Mediterranean cultures. This selective adoption of the prohibition suggests a deliberate choice rather than a regional cultural norm. The question becomes, what specific knowledge or insight prompted religious authorities to single out this particular animal? Intriguingly, pig domestication began around 13,000 years ago in what is now Turkey in the Near East, the very cradle of civilization where these religions later emerged. Initial archaeological evidence indicates that early Neolithic communities raised pigs alongside other livestock without apparent restriction. The shift away from pork consumption in certain communities appears gradual, suggesting an evolving understanding rather than a sudden revelation or arbitrary decree. When we compare ancient texts describing pigs, we find remarkably similar language across cultures, separated by vast distances and time periods. Biblical descriptions mirror Mesopotamian tablets in their characterization of pigs as creatures associated with uncleanliness. This convergence of perspective across isolated cultures raises profound questions about shared ancient knowledge or observational wisdom. You shall not eat any of their flesh, and you shall not touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you. Deuteronomy 14:8 reinforces this prohibition with similar language, establishing consistency across different books of Jewish scripture. What makes these textual prohibitions particularly fascinating is their specificity. Both traditions categorize animals according to complex classification systems. In Judaism, land animals must have split hooves and chew cud to be considered kosher. The pig uniquely possesses one qualifying characteristic, split hooves, but lacks the other, chewing cud, placing it in a liminal category that perhaps explains the heightened attention it receives in biblical texts. Islamic classifications follow similar patterns of categorization, dividing animals into permitted and forbidden categories based on specific characteristics. The emphasis on the pig specifically, rather than simply including it among other forbidden animals, suggests special significance. Could it be that the pig's unique biological characteristics were understood to present specific dangers not found in other forbidden animals? The textual evidence reveals another curious pattern. While both traditions prohibit numerous foods, the prohibition against pork receives disproportionate emphasis and elaboration. This special attention suggests that religious authorities considered this particular prohibition especially significant for their communities' spiritual and physical well-being. But why single out this animal above others? When we examine the contextual settings of these prohibitions in their respective scriptures, we find they often appear alongside fundamental moral and ethical teachings, rather than merely ceremonial instructions. This placement suggests these dietary laws were understood as essential components of righteous living, not peripheral customs. Scholars overlook this contextual significance in their analysis of these traditions. Epidemiological studies conducted in regions with high pork consumption show statistical correlations with certain health conditions that are less prevalent in traditionally pork-avoiding populations. Could ancient religious authorities have observed these health patterns even without understanding their microbiological mechanism. The pig's digestive biology differs significantly from ruminants, like cattle and sheep. Unlike these animals, pigs possess a simple stomach system that processes food in approximately 4 hours, compared to 24 hours in cattle, potentially allowing more toxins to remain in their tissues. The pig's omnivorous scavenging behavior in natural settings means it consumes substances that grazing animals would avoid, including carrion and waste, a characteristic that would have been readily observable to ancient peoples. Trichinosis, a parasitic disease caused by consuming undercooked pork, was a serious health threat in pre-refrigeration societies. The microscopic Trichinella spiralis worm can encyst in human muscle tissue, causing long-term health complications that might have appeared mysterious or punishment-like to ancient observers. Modern cooking methods and food safety standards have dramatically reduced this risk, but in ancient times, the connection between pork consumption and subsequent illness would have been evident even without understanding the specific parasite involved. Another scientific consideration involves the pig's biological similarities to humans. Both species share remarkably similar organ systems, with pig heart valves and skin still used in human medical procedures today. This biological compatibility raises the theoretical possibility of zoonotic disease transmission, infections jumping from pigs to humans, at rates potentially higher than from other livestock. But ancient observers have noticed unusual disease patterns associated with pig husbandry. Environmental factors present another scientific dimension. In arid Middle Eastern climates, where these religions originated, pig farming requires significantly more water resources than raising sheep or goat. This ecological inefficiency might have contributed to practical concerns about pig husbandry in water-scarce regions. Additionally, pigs lack efficient cooling mechanisms, like sweating, making them less adaptable to desert environments than other domesticated animals. Recent research in nutritional anthropology suggests that traditional diets evolve in response to environmental pressures and available food resources. The prohibition of pork might represent an adaptive cultural response to specific regional health challenges, codified into religious practice to ensure community adherence. Does this scientific perspective adequately explain the remarkable consistency of pork prohibition across different religious traditions? Throughout history, the pork prohibition functioned as a powerful identity marker for Jewish communities living under Greek, Roman, and later Christian rule, with refusal to eat pork, symbolizing resistance to assimilation and maintenance of cultural distinctiveness, despite persecution. Historical records document numerous instances where Jewish individuals chose martyrdom rather than consume pork when forced by oppressive regimes, demonstrating the prohibition's central importance to religious identity. What hidden power does this food taboo hold that inspired such extraordinary commitment across centuries? Roman Empire's embrace of pork consumption created a stark cultural contrast with Jewish practices. Roman soldiers and settlers brought pork-centric diets to occupied territories, establishing pig farming throughout their conquered land. For Jewish communities living under Roman rule, abstaining from pork became not merely a religious obligation, but a daily act of cultural resistance against imperial influence. Archaeological evidence from this period shows distinct household food preparation patterns in Jewish quarters, revealing how dietary practices physically manifested cultural boundaries. During the Maccabean Revolt, 167-160 BCE, Antiochus II specifically targeted Jewish dietary laws, forcing Jews to sacrifice pigs and consume pork as a deliberate strategy to break Jewish religious identity. The Jewish rebellion against these impositions demonstrates how central these food prohibitions had become to cultural preservation. First and Second Maccabees document numerous accounts of Jews choosing death over violation of these dietary laws. Similarly, medieval Muslim communities living under Christian rule in Spain and elsewhere maintained their prohibition of pork, despite significant social and economic pressures to assimilate. Historical records show that authorities sometimes used willingness to consume pork as a test of genuine conversion from Islam to Christianity during the Spanish Inquisition. The emotional and identity significance of this prohibition clearly transcended mere dietary preference. The psychological function of these food taboos deserves deeper consideration. By creating visible daily practices that differentiate community members from outsiders, these prohibitions strengthen group cohesion and cultural continuity. Every meal becomes an opportunity to affirm religious identity and belonging. This psychological reinforcement helps explain the remarkable persistence of these dietary restrictions across millennia despite changing circumstances and scientific understanding. Intriguingly, both Islamic and Jewish traditions developed extensive analytical frameworks to address edge cases and borderline situations regarding food prohibition. This jurisprudential attention reveals how central these practices were to religious life. Scholars in both traditions produced volumes of analysis on questions like accidental consumption, mixtures containing prohibited ingredients, and necessary exceptions for survival situations. This intellectual investment further embedded these practices into the cultural identity of believers. Beyond practical considerations, religious scholars have long suggested the pig prohibition carries deeper symbolic meanings, with many traditions associating pigs with spiritual impurity, moral corruption, and negative spiritual forces. In Jewish mystical traditions, the pig represents Esau and Edom, symbolizing corrupt spiritual powers opposed to divine truth. Islamic scholarly interpretations similarly connect the prohibition to spiritual purification and discipline of bodily desires. Could these symbolic dimensions reveal deeper spiritual wisdom encoded in religious dietary laws? The pig's physical characteristics and behaviors made it a potent symbol across many ancient cultures. Its omnivorous consumption habits, eating virtually anything, including waste, contrasted sharply with the selective grazing of animals considered clean. This indiscriminate consumption became metaphorically associated with moral indiscrimination and spiritual corruption. Religious texts frequently use dietary metaphors to describe spiritual states, suggesting these prohibitions function on multiple conceptual levels simultaneously. In Islamic spiritual traditions, food prohibitions generally connect to the concept of tayyib, goodness, purity, versus khabith, corruption, impurity. The Quran frequently pairs these concepts, suggesting dietary laws serve to maintain both physical and spiritual purity. Sufi interpretations extend this understanding, viewing dietary discipline as training for spiritual discipline, controlling what enters the body as practice for controlling what enters the mind and heart. Jewish Kabbalistic traditions associate the pig with the Sitra Achra, the other side, or forces of spiritual impurity. Pig's unique status as having one clean sign, split hooves, but lacking another, chewing cud, symbolizes hypocrisy and deception, appearing partially righteous while remaining fundamentally impure. This symbolic reading transforms the dietary prohibition into a spiritual warning against deceptive influences that appear partially good but remain fundamentally corrupt. Both traditions emphasize that following divine commandments, including dietary restrictions, represents submission to divine wisdom, even when human understanding remains limited. This attitude of faithful obedience itself constitutes spiritual training, cultivating humility and trust in divine guidance. Untold prohibition thus functions not merely as a rule, but as a spiritual practice developing character qualities valued in both religious traditions. The consistent emphasis on conscious eating, being mindful of food sources and preparation, creates numerous daily opportunities for spiritual mindfulness. Every meal becomes an occasion for remembering divine commandments and one's religious identity. This integration of spiritual awareness into everyday activities represents a sophisticated approach to spirituality that doesn't separate sacred practices from ordinary life. Interestingly, both traditions contain eschatological end times, references to pigs that suggest the prohibition has cosmic significance. Various interpretations in both faiths connect proper observance of dietary laws to the eventual triumph of divine order in history. But these dietary practices connect to larger cosmic patterns beyond immediate health concerns. In contemporary society, continue influencing billions worldwide, with modern Islamic and Jewish communities maintaining these practices despite dramatically different scientific and social contexts than when they originated. Modern health-focused interpretations suggest these prohibitions represent ancient wisdom about nutrition and disease prevention, validated by contemporary understanding of zoonotic diseases and comparative nutritional profiles. Others maintain these practices primarily for their spiritual and cultural significance rather than practical benefits. What can these enduring traditions teach us about balancing ancient wisdom with modern knowledge? The continued observance of these dietary restrictions, despite radical changes in food production, preservation technology, and medical understanding, demonstrates their profound cultural importance beyond their original practical context. In modern industrial societies with refrigeration, food safety regulations, and advanced cooking technologies, many of the original health risks associated with pork consumption have been mitigated. Yet the prohibitions remain central to religious practice for observant Muslims and Jews worldwide. Modern Jewish and Islamic food certification systems have developed sophisticated methods for evaluating complex industrial food products, demonstrating how these ancient traditions adapt to contemporary circumstances while maintaining core principles. Kosher and halal certification industries have become global enterprises, employing modern scientific testing alongside traditional religious supervision to maintain these dietary traditions in industrialized food systems. Medical research continues investigating potential health implications of different dietary patterns, including those avoiding pork. Some studies suggest potential benefits to Mediterranean and Middle Eastern traditional diets that exclude pork, though isolating specific effects of pork avoidance remains challenging. Contemporary nutritional science acknowledges that traditional dietary patterns often contain embedded wisdom developed through centuries of observation, even when the original rationales were framed in pre-scientific terms. And environmental perspectives offer another modern interpretive lens. Some ecological analyses suggest that in arid regions where these religions originated, focusing on ruminant livestock, cattle, rather than pigs, represented more sustainable land use, as these animals could convert inedible grasses to human food without competing directly for grain resources. This environmental wisdom, potentially embedded in ancient dietary laws, offers interesting parallels to contemporary sustainability concerns. For many modern observers, the most valuable aspect of these traditions may be their demonstration of how cultural practices create community, cohesion, and identity across generations. In increasingly individualistic societies, these communal food traditions provide connection to historical continuity and shared experience. The psychological benefits of belonging to communities with clear practices and boundaries may contribute to documented health and well-being advantages observed in religious communities. The persistence of these dietary traditions raises profound questions about the relationship between ancient wisdom and modern knowledge. Rather than seeing these traditions merely as outdated taboos awaiting scientific explanation, we might view them as complex cultural systems serving multiple functions simultaneously: practical, spiritual, psychological, and social. Their remarkable endurance suggests they continue meeting human needs beyond their original context. As we continue exploring these ancient mysteries, the question, what other forgotten wisdom might lie encoded in religious traditions that modern analysis has yet to fully appreciate? But these dietary laws represent just one visible aspect of a more comprehensive ancient understanding of human relationship with the natural world. The answers await continued investigation, an open-minded dialogue between traditional knowledge and contemporary science. What aspects of this ancient wisdom might we have overlooked in our modern rush to explain everything through current scientific paradigm? Share your thoughts in the comments below.